Hello everyone and welcome to our video on pediatric growth, development, and assessment. In this first part of the video series, we're going to go over just some of the basics of growth and development. If you'd like to look at these objectives in more detail, you can see the accompanying PowerPoint. So what is growth and development? Well, very simply, we see quantitative and qualitative changes from the time that you're a newborn all the way up until you hit adolescence. Now, growth, as we describe as an increase in size or weight, is typically in quantitative measures, whereas development, as far as the stages of complexity and your abilities, is more of a qualitative measure. We'll also be talking about some of the maturation of systems and the differentiation that happens and how that changes how we take care of each age group. As growth and development occurs, we know that there is a definitive pattern and definitive stages that happen. These are continuous, they're orderly, it's progressive. These are basically predictable patterns that we can say all humans, no matter where you come from, no matter where you live, will progress through these stages. And these are universal. The same thing with the stages of qualitative development. They move from simple to complex, and we can predict some of these. And the patterns that we're going to see are both directional, sequential, and paced. We're also going to talk about some of the sensitive periods, such as infancy and that first newborn year, where a lot of these changes happen. And some of the milestones that we look for too. When we're taking care of pediatric patients, we want to make sure they're hitting gross motor, fine motor, language milestones. And we're going to be going over all of those later in the video series. Now, stages and patterns for directional growth. Obviously, we've all heard of cephalocaudal or head to tail direction. And you can see this most predominantly in utero, where the infant or fetus is mostly just a head with a tiny little body. And you're going to continue to grow like that, and also proximal distally throughout the first several years of life. Now, when we teach growth and development in pediatrics, we use developmental periods. And there's some variation in textbooks with the specific ages, but you can see here from neonatal to infancy, toddler to preschool, school age to adolescence, many texts cover this exact pattern of developmental periods. So when we're doing our developmental assessment, typically during a well child visit, but we're also keen on this during sick visits as well, we're doing screenings. And one of the most essential components of your health visit with any kind of pediatric patient is the assessment of developmental function. Why is that so essential? It's because we want to catch problems early and intervene early, because that's better for the patient, it's better for the parents, and we're all going to see better outcomes. Consequently, in clinical practice, you're going to see a myriad of tools that address this exact thing. One example is ages and stages questionnaires. A great place to get really familiar with the screenings is go to any state-specific program website and download their materials. For the example here, you can see this is the Pennsylvania Early and Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment Tool, or the EPSDT program. And for each well visit age, you can see where we do screenings, what type we do, and for the advanced practice people in the audience, also the code that you're going to use for that visit. And typically, as you know, well visits are associated with receiving immunizations. These also have a provided schedule, such as this example here from the CDC. And you can see at each age, we typically have a well visit around then, and they receive all of these particular vaccinations at that visit. Now, what are some of the risk factors for developmental delays? I'm including these here, and please feel free to pause the video or look at the accompanying PowerPoint to see these in more detail. However, it's pretty self-explanatory with some of these. Any child who has risk factors involving parents or parental activity or has a chronic disease process makes them more difficult to take care of, but it also makes them more prone to experience some of these developmental delays. For example, the child with chronic otitis media might have some hearing impairments. If they've missed a lot of school, they might also be behind in some of their learning milestones. And as you're going in to see these patients, keeping in mind some of these developmental screening red flags is super important. For example, the patient here who's 4 to 6 months old and has very poor or no head control, we're really worried about something neuromuscularly wrong with them. And that continues at each stage. We can see similar examples here for the 6 to 12-month-old age range. For example, a patient who cannot bear weight when pulled to stand. Again, we're worried because typically by that point, you should be able to do that. And I've included a few more here just so that you can review these, again, either pausing the video or looking at the PowerPoint and getting an idea of if you were seeing this patient, would this make you feel like something's wrong? For the example, if you get to 18 months old and you still haven't said a purposeful word yet, we're very concerned that either there's something receptive or expressive going on that isn't right. And again, we have several more developmental red flags. And as we go through in the next parts of the videos, these should make more sense as we cover some of the important development that happens in these age periods. And this last slide with the developmental red flags is another great example. At 5 years old, we should be getting this child ready to go to kindergarten. So if their speech is not understandable, something is wrong. Communication. This is one of the most challenging parts about being in pediatrics and probably the most popular reason that I hear people not wanting to be involved in this specialty. Whether it's communicating with a young child or an adolescent or even the parents, there's a lot of things that go into making this stressful. However, there are some basic communication skills that we can use to build rapport with our parents and the patients, whether you're a bedside nurse or a provider. Active listening and not staring at the computer the entire time. Showing empathy and encouragement, both for the parents who are struggling to take care of their child, but also for the child who's typically pretty scared to be in a medical environment. You want to use developmentally appropriate approaches for all of the age groups. Example, you wouldn't talk to an adolescent the same way you would talk to a toddler. You have to be cognizant of the words that you use and how they're going to be interpreted by your patient. But you also have to be cognizant of the tone of your voice, your body language, all your nonverbal cues. And if you really want to know how best to interact with toddlers and preschoolers, go on YouTube and watch a video from this gentleman here. Is one of the great examples of how to interact with kids in a way that's going to be friendly and they're going to want to cooperate with you. Now, Bright Futures provides 6 steps for building the provider-client-family partnership. And this applies, again, to anyone who walks into that room and who's going to be taking care of this patient. Please pause the video to review these in more detail. Thank you very much for viewing this first part of the video series. Please continue on to the next, where we'll talk about growth and development of the infant.